Hi, good evening, afternoon, everyone, depending where you're tuning in from. Welcome to Ancient Wine Guys, club number 40. It's hard to believe this is our 40th. Starting to, for some of us, the number of clubs are starting to catch up with our age here, pretty fast. Some of them not, I think we're already past their age, but so we're really excited about this club, Roots of Rome, Wines of Romulus and Remus. We've kind of danced around this topic in the past. We had a Wines of Romulus, I think just solo show by Romulus, one of the earlier clubs, and then we've done, yeah, as those of you who've been with us for a while, know we've done some of the content here in different kinds of ways, like Wines of Magna Graecia and some of the wine roads and things like that. So but this seemed like a really good one, and we found it. I can't remember if we've brought this up on the call or not. We've kind of found over the last few years that we'll pick out a topic, and then almost invariably the next National Geographic History edition will come out, and it's got the exact same topic that we picked out. So somehow our lines are bugged. But it's still funny they had one in the August one, like literally after we picked this topic out and started rolling with it. So it's kind of funny just see how that works. I guess maybe it just says we're more up with the times than we sometimes feel like we are. Um, you all know the format. We'll kind of do some of the historical content, run through that. We'll do the wines, and then if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or we can take them at the end on any of the content and or any of the wines. So we have the four club wines as usual, and then we have a special offer wine, and then we had for the first time a special offer olive oil, which we're really excited about. So Dana's actually in Korea right now with family. I don't know if he's maybe scoping out the next Ancient Wines trip or club as well. We don't know, but fortunately he won't be able to join us tonight. So it's just the three of us. But we'll start out with the first wine, I guess, which is tea. You're going to be taking us through this.
Yeah. So what's great about a lot of the wines that we're showcasing tonight is they're around Rome. So if you happen to be traveling to Italy, like you can easily visit a lot of these wineries. So the first wine we have is from Lazio, which is about 20 kilometers southeast of Rome. It's about like maybe you can get there from in like a 40-minute drive depending on traffic, from like the heart of Rome. And Lazio, as a wine region, developed to serve um, the demand for consumption of wine in Rome, the papacy, etc. Um, and this wine, Casale Marchese, is which is the name of the House of the Marquis, was it used to be owned by a Marquis, and before it got bought by the Carletti family in the 1700s. And actually, this whole estate was found um, right by a ancient Roman cistern, so perfect for building an estate and having enough water to, have crops and farming. And the Lazio region in general is known because it's so close to Rome. A lot uh, of the wineries there like farm in conventional method to try to boost production. But this one is a really small production winery. Um, they farm organically and they've always farmed organically. And this is a nice blend of Trebbiano, Malvasia, and Bologna. Uh, Trebbiano and Bologna are pretty much indigenous varieties near Rome. Malvasia is a little bit more aromatic, and this is done in stainless steel tanks, uh, made kind of like a really fresh wine that has a little bit of aromatics and like perfect for quaffling and on hot summer Italian days in the capital. Um, tasting it, I get, that little bit of like floral note, from the Malvasia, that kind of like, like white daisy kind of white flowers. And then from the Trebbiano, you get a little bit more of that lemon kind of citrus note. And the Bologna kind of gives it. Bologna is a grape. We had it in a previous club, and it kind of gives it a little bit more of that structure, a little bit more of that uh like backbone and kind of like that kind of leesy like note to it.
We had the actually, see, I think the Bologna was in the first wines of Romulus club we did, and
Yeah.
really interesting that club was like, I mean that club was been like 5 or 6 years ago, something like that now. But we had a little bit of that left over, and a few of us have kind of picked that bottle out of the locker, and it's actually aged really well. It's an interesting wine. Not suggesting necessarily that you age this one, but wasn't the intention when we got that one, but it's gotten super interesting over, the course of, well, I don't remember what the year was, but we probably had a couple years on it already when like this one does, and then it's add another 5 years or something like that. So yeah, really interesting. Just kind of see
Yeah,
a
and we still have more bottles of that
couple more.
in the
Okay.
locker. So if anyone's interested in it,
Yeah.
yeah, we can
Yeah,
definitely send it to you during the holidays.
yeah, I think this is a good example of of Frascati in general, just of the style. This is like a very kind of like textbook Frascati. Though that extra couple of years of age, usually you see it released a little bit younger. And this is Frascati Superiore. There's like regular like just Frascatis as well that can be a little bit lighter and also released a little younger. But this is definitely it's definitely a wine that punches above its weight class in that most folks think of Frascati as just as kind of like T was saying, just like slaking the thirst of like, you know, Romans who are trying to escape the heat and have like a something cool glass of white to kind of like guzzle down. It's a wine that I think always shows a little bit more complexity than say like some other wines that sort of do that, or like Pic Pool de Pinet and from southern France. If you've ever been like in like the south of France, they have this very crisp white wine that's like kind of simple and it never really kind of gets more complexity. Or like Muscadet in Western France, where can get very complex, but a lot of the less expensive versions are just kind of like white wine. There's lots of wines you find all over the world that sort of fill that role. I always find Frascati to be one that has a little bit more complexity, and I think it comes from like T is saying about like you have this blend of varieties, the Malvasia, the aromatics, the Bologna, a little more texture and structure. And so yeah, it's just I think it's as far as a wine that you can sometimes find, if you're looking for a interesting white wine but it doesn't break the bank, like it's definitely something that you can kind of reliably go for. So yeah, it's definitely a very fun wine for like, or I should say versatile wine. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, T. So we're gonna run through in between the wines. We're gonna talk a little bit about the just some of what's in the write up, and then just a little bit of extra kind of information, whether or not you've had a chance to read them or not. But just to put these wines in context. So, if you're a student of Roman history, you know the traditional date of the foundation of Rome is 753 BCE. So that's a date that Roman historians picked up on and used. It's a kind of I mean, it is an ahistorical date because it's shrouded in a very early history of the city prior to anything that would resemble the Rome that would become the center of a world empire. So and so the date is kind of a mythological date, and also these early characters, these early heroes like Romulus and Remus were pretty much conjured out of thin air. I mean, you can notice already the connection between the name Romulus, even Remus, and the city of Rome, which makes a lot of sense if you think about like how Athens got its name from Athena. So even the Roman historians, the main Roman history actually wasn't written down by Romans in Latin until the third century BCE. So it's about 450, 500 years, after these sorts of events. And there are really two historians that wrote about this early period. One of them is a Greek historian, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, who's come up in our write-ups quite a few times. And then another one, Titus Livius or Livy, you might know. Both of them are working during the time of the Emperor Augustus. And so they both wrote a kind of Dionysius Halicarnassus had an antiquities that kind of went up to the First Punic War, which we've talked about in the club as well. And then Livy, the early history all the way up to his own day. And he had it's 142 books of history, like an entire life's work. And we only have, sadly, only 35 of them. And the books that we tend to have are, part of it's accident, but some of the early books we have just because I think they were so interesting to people to read about these myths. So I have a quote from Livy that I wanted to read just because I think it kind of gets at this connection between history, myth, and archaeology that we're always looking at so carefully with our Ancient Wine Guys project. So he says this is in his From the Foundation of the City, very, very close to the beginning. He says, such traditions as belong to the time before the city was founded, or rather was presently to be founded, and are rather adorned with poetic legends than based upon trustworthy historical proofs, I purpose neither to affirm nor to refute. It's the privilege of antiquity to mingle divine things with human, and so to add to the dignity of the beginnings of cities. And if any people ought to be allowed to consecrate their origins and refer them to a divine source, so great is the military glory of the Roman people that when they profess that their father and the father of their founder was none other than Mars, the nations of the earth may well submit to this also with as good a grace as they submit to Rome's dominion. So it's kind of I think a great quote to kind of give you a sense of what these historians themselves thought about this very early period. And also, looking back as he was from Rome's height, right, during the time of Augustus, when it controlled pretty much all of the known world. So Rome very much had an interest as a world power during this period to have a kind of divinely sanctioned beginning, right? Like a divine origin story. And so yeah, we'll talk about this. I'll talk about this a little bit more in the next section after the next wine. But basically, they're going to have this what I would call like an indigenous mythological tradition. So a tradition that came out of this Romulus and Remus story comes out of local myth. So there's local kings and things like that that gradually kind of assume power over this region. But there's also an entirely different tradition, which is an inherited tradition from the Greeks. So we'll talk about that after we get the next wine in our glass. And for that, I'm going to kick it back over to T. The pictures here, just before I do so, this is kind of an early map of Rome, and the Palatine Hill is kind of where we're focused, and the Aventine Hill as well. And then this is a statue of Livy, which is actually at the so I saw this a couple of times in the last few years, but it's in Vienna. So it's kind of a nice, they have a lot of pictures of statues of famous ancient Greeks and Romans. So, all right, with that, T, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so the second wine is 2022 Cantina Morone Rosso from Campania, Italy. And you might be wondering, we're talking about Rome. Why do we have a wine from the south of Italy, kind of on near the boot, more on the instep of the boot in southern Italy? And as Jeff mentioned, and I won't go into this too much since he will, but a lot of the early Roman emperors wanted to connect their lineage and history to the Greeks. And if you remember, one of our clubs wants a Magna Graecia. There were a lot of Greek colonists that brought, grapes and etc. to Italy. And so this is a blend of 65% Sangiovese, 25% PD Rosso, and 10% Camiolo. And this is a wine, that's like, Sangiovese is probably best known as like the main grape in Tuscany in central north of Italy. You know, think of Chianti Classico. It's the main grape you find in Chianti, Brunello, the Montalcino, Rosso di Montalcino, etc. Um, and it's blended with PD Rosso, which is a grape that's in Campania, and Camiolo, a grape that usually is also indigenous variety that is PD Rosso. A lot of people probably believe it was brought by the Greeks to Italy, and this is done in um, just oak barrels. And I haven't had this one for a while, but it kind of has like this warmth, this kind of like, I get like kind of like soft, like stewed cherries and but then there's like a little spice to it, and it's like this really beautiful blend of like savory and sweet to it. Um, yeah, and like there's still like a little bit of like that blueberry tartness on the finish. I mean, this is a wine that I think, like would go well with, eggplant parmesan, chicken parmesan, like just great with like a nice charcuterie plate because I think the acidity would like help, you know, um, kind of cut through some of like the richness of like salumi and cheeses.
Yeah, and just to kind of to chime in about, about some of the styles that you get from wines like this and some of the kind of, let's say, typical essences of Campania. So I'm gonna go the soil here. This is volcanic soil, and actually this is something that's also going to be found throughout Lazio as well, is these tufa volcanic limestones, soils where you're having kind of this sort of um, yeah, porous and well-drained soils that um, give so it's kind of claimed they impart this sensation of, you can sometimes they call it pepperiness, minerality, whatever, however you kind of want to frame it. There is kind of this yeah, I would say a little bit of that kind of savory tinge that comes in, is sort of how I like to frame it sometimes. Some folks call it salty, some folks call it, which I think is maybe a little aggressive of a term. But you see that a lot, used a lot for wines from Campania, and then again also from Lazio. So all the wines tonight are from, basically around Rome, and then this one from Campania. But yes, this is like a volcanic red, if you will. And the Petit Rosso, I think, also often is kind of known for contributing a peppery character as well, and by that I mean like a white pepper, black pepper kind of flavors. And yeah, I mean, for me on this one, I definitely get a lot of that same stuff too, like a lot of that kind of like sort of spicy, sort of blue fruits. The I think I mentioned this in the write up. The Camaaiolo was previously called Barbera del Sannio, but they changed the name because it was had nothing to do with Barbera from Piemonte, and it's just one of those things that it was the only reason I bring it up is it's kind of a good reminder that things are always being updated and changing, and kind of thoughts are changing always about wines. So yeah, and I mean I've never had a Camaiola before this wine, and most folks wouldn't. A lot of indigenous varieties in both Lazio and Campania as well. So always exciting regions to feature wines from, because almost always we're finding something new.
Yeah, and also like, this wine is just a very approachable wine. I think when a lot of people have wine from Campania, they think of Aglianico, which is very tannic, and needs time to age. Delicious, absolutely delicious, great. But I think this is like a wine that, if you're really in the uh, southern Italy Campania wines, this is a wine you have while you're waiting for your Aglianico to age.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. That's a great point. You don't see so many kind of like young, fresh, drinkable. I mean, not that this is like young or super, super light. I would say the next wine is probably a little bit lighter. But yeah, definitely a little more approachable when young, which is nice.
Isn't the Piedi Rosso a good aging wine as well?
Piedi
Yeah,
Rosso, yeah,
We've had
definitely
some
can be
folks.
a wine that you can lay down for 10, 15 years easily, depending on how it's made. So I mean, like, it's always kind of like a yes but or a yes maybe sort of thing. With depending on the varieties. I mean, even Aglianico that he's like mentioning, like there are like versions that are made that are kind of like lightly extracted. They don't have that big like dense tannic core to them. But in general, I would say grapes have these tendencies, these kind of um, their natural kind of inclination towards being a certain way. And then if craft them one way or the other, or you grow them, or one way or the other, then you can obviously coax out a wide range, a diverse range of styles. But yeah, Piedi Rosso they can be like big. They can be like kind of big, tannic, monstrous wines. But in this case, a little more approachable. Thanks, T. I think we'll move on to Jeff, your next bit here.
Yeah, so thanks, Steve, for the wine and for the segue into this region, Magna Graecia. So, as the guys mentioned, we picked this wine because of the connection to southern Greece and southern Greece, which was inhabited by southern Italy, which was inhabited by just we're in southern Greece, but southern Italy, which was inhabited by Greeks. So, beginning in the eighth century, eighth and seventh centuries BCE, the Greeks actually settled much of the Mediterranean coastline. This is the same period in which the Phoenicians were doing more or less the same thing along the north coast of Africa, Spain. And so we've done a lot of work with both of these groups of people in and subsequent to this period of kind of a lot of it was based on kind of mercantile colonization, but ended up feeding into long-term settlement, particularly in the case of the Greeks in this region. So Italy, southern Italy and Sicily. And you kind of get a sense from the map here. These are just different areas of Greece, right? The Ionic Greeks, the Northwest Greeks, the Achaeans, and the Doric Greeks. Yeah, Sicily they were competing with Phoenicians over that territory for a long, long time. But really, you can tell kind of from the density of settlement here that the main area of Greek settlement in the mainland of Italy was around the Bay of Naples. So Neapolis is, of course, modern day Naples. This just the region of Campania, basically the wine growing region, extremely fertile from all the volcanic activity, and good for wine and crops, growing just about anything at any time of the year. So that was that's kind of the epicenter here of Greek culture in Italy. They had in Sicily, if you go down there, it's Syracuse and all these cities, but for us in Italy, it's here. So the Romans really like whatever you take as the kind of foundation date, the city really started growing in the fifth and fourth centuries BC and expanding outside of Latium to the Romans in Latin throughout the Italian peninsula. So they went north, they went east, they went west, they went south. And they encountered Greeks actually in different directions, but the main point of contact would have been to the south here. And it's kind of one of those, I guess, one of those truisms about the Romans is they sort of took things from everybody else and either refined them, made them better, or just straight out copied them. And the same was true with their religion. So they had indigenous gods. They had a kind of a sky god. They had a sea god. They had a sun god. They held all these different things, but they quickly realized, well, the Greeks have a lot of the same gods, but theirs are a lot more interesting versions of these gods than ours are. And that's because they had these amazing backstories, right? All of these Greek gods had not just the kind of what they do, like they represent the sea, but they also had an unbelievable array of stories that came along with them. So the Romans basically just took those, stuck their own names on them. So Jupiter, Zeus became Jupiter, but Jupiter all of a sudden had all these other superpowers that Jupiter didn't have. And then they also had a proclivity for adopting heroes. So the Romans didn't really have like they had Romulus and Remus, but I mean they weren't connected in any way to the Greek gods. They weren't connected to the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey, which were the most famous. I mean, we have no comparison in the modern world to just having like two stories which completely dominated like all of popular culture, basically. It'd be like only two movies that ever come out. We've seen those movies like 1,000 times. It's literally that level of kind of just pervasiveness in the culture. Like everybody knew the stories and the characters from those two epics. So as the Romans are kind of getting more and more powerful and running into these different civilizations, primarily the Greeks, they became more kind of anxious that they weren't connected really in any way to the Iliad and the Odyssey and to these heroes. And so what they did is they effectively wrote themselves into the story. And they did that by taking the character of Aeneas, who's it's actually a pretty significant hero in the Iliad, fighting on the Trojan side. And they basically made it so that after the fall of Troy, he fled with his family from the burning city and went on his own kind of odyssey, basically a journey around the Mediterranean world with similar kinds of adventures until he landed in Italy. And then there he landed in Campania here, in this exact region. And then he became, engaged in local conflicts, basically to establish the Trojans as a kind of establish their birthright to the land, essentially. So it's kind of it's a narrative kind of conquest, but it's also a narrative of immigrants, which I think is very central to the kind of Roman consciousness, is that everyone in Rome came from kind of somewhere else, really. I mean, the city just grew up from nothing and adopted its neighbors, and then eventually its more far-flung neighbors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next section. But what's interesting is if you think about I mean, you may or may not know the traditional date of the Trojan War, but it's like the Romans gave 753, made 753 the date for the founding of Rome. They established 1184 BCE as the date of the Trojan War, which is, we have a historical basis for the Trojan War around that time. So it's not this is rooted in some actual history and archaeology, but even, whatever the precise date is there, you have a several hundred years gap, which would be a problem if Aeneas left Troy in 1184, whatever it is, and the city of Rome is founded in 753. The only way to explain that is to essentially make up a king list, which is exactly what later antiquarians did. Dionysius of Halicarnassus is actually credited with just making up a list of kings that filled in that huge several hundred-year gap. And the list starts with I mean, this is part of the myth as well, but Ascanius, who was the son of Aeneas, he's the first of what are called the Alban kings. So a community outside of Rome called Alba Longa. He became the king of Alba Longa. And then there's a whole series of kings who came after him that were just sort of conjured up essentially until we land at the two guys I'll talk about in the next section that we wrote about, Numitor and Amulius, who were this kind of dispute over who should rule, but they were the last kings of Alba Longa, right before 753 BCE. So that's kind of the history, a little bit of how we arrive at this kind of, I would call like I don't know what I would call it, but it's an external kind of inherited origin story. So really Rome has its kind of more native indigenous tradition with the Romulus and Remus story, and then you have this I would say even more important in the long run story that they got from the Greeks and wrote themselves into, of Aeneas and his son and subsequent dynasty. And of course, I can't remember if we talked about in this write up, but it's certainly come up in the past that Julius Caesar actually claimed descent from Aeneas by way of Iulus, who's the son, which is where we get the word Julius Caesar. So there's a whole kind of importance to as well. So we could talk about this all day, but I'll kick it over to Ryan now for another one. In this picture, by the way, this is the temple at Paestum, which is a city very, I don't know if it's on here or not, but Poseidonia there. You can see it on the map. So very close to Bay of Naples in Campania. It's Greek temple, obviously, from I think it's seventh century BCE. So very early, it coincides with the date of this, of the Greek colonization of Italy. So
Great, thanks, Jeff. Yeah. So actually, I can kind of piggyback a little bit on the origin story there because we're going back up to Lazio, and this is actually from a bit south of Lazio in a region called Cori, Cori, and Cori is a region that claims that it was also founded by Aeneas as well, and some of the other like heroes, if you will. They also mention Dardanus and I think Corax as one of their as the founders of this region. So actually, it wasn't part of Rome initially, and this region was eventually incorporated politically via conquest and also via alliances into kind of the greater Rome. Relatively early on, as I understand it, like in the not like just not far after like the 753 founding of Rome. So one of the early kind of I guess I don't know, it'd be a satellite sort of region of Rome. So it falls today in the Lazio region. Cori is known for having a lot of hills. These are kind of big, volcanic hills again. And Marco Carpinetti from Tenuta Carpinetti is one of the premier winemakers in this region. The Tufolicio is one of the vineyards that he farms on, I believe, 7 hills, if I remember correctly. And for this wine, he is making a blend of 60% Montepulciano and 40% Cesanese. Cesanese was kind of the main draw for the reason we selected this wine. Cesanese you pretty much only find in and around Rome and the Lazio region. It's a really special variety. I always love the wines from it. You always get this nice kind of softness, a little bit of spice, lots of those kind of, sort of like dried red fruit sort of flavors. And this wine is made, I would say, in a lighter style for Cesanese and Montepulciano as well. Montepulciano is still doing a lot of work here as well, giving a lot of that kind of like juicy, sort of supple fruits to it, and giving it kind of like that approachability as well. But this is, yeah, I would say, as far as a style, like something that for me struck me as just like really, really, really easy and fun to drink. Was not something that I was thinking about sticking in the cellar. It was something I was thinking about sticking in the fridge and just popping the cork after it had a little bit of a chill. Um, I'm loving it every time I've had it over the last few days. I mean, I think it really, really holds up really nicely after a few days open. But it's yeah, just like a lovely, easygoing wine. That I think shows off the kind of the ability of the region to, again, you can get a lot of sunshine in there, you can get grapes pretty ripe, but that volcanic element to it, to the region, that typically, again, when I said like well drained, what does volcanic soils mean? Like what does this do to the vines? How does it result in the glass? The grapes still struggle a bit for ripeness. The soils can be pretty acidic and kind of and poor soils, depending on obviously on the individual geology. And as a result, you get complexity that can get retained while you're getting ripeness. If you just, this is just kind of an aside here, but if you just grow grapes just like in super, super, super fertile soils and the grapes just get super ripe, you seem to lose a lot of that complexity is kind of what we find. So that's why these soil types, again, just as a little refresher, limestone, and volcanic soils, really rocky soils with poor fertility. These are typically what we're seeing making slightly more interesting wines because the grapes, they'll thicken up the skins, they develop this phenolic characteristics that for us in the glass they give that kind of intriguing complexity and aromatic complexity. So that's just again a little reminder of like why we're always talking about dirt, we're always talking about soil. A lot of other things are at play there as well in terms of the vintage, climate, how much rain, and all that sort of stuff, UV exposure, elevation, wind, all those kinds of things that we've talked about in the past. But just a quick little reminder there about why we're always harping on the soils. So from there, I think I'll pass it back to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Ryan. So everyone probably recognizes this image, either because of the club write-up or you've seen it in person in the Capitoline Museum in Rome, or you've seen one of the many thousands of copies of this thing. Just before I jump in, the very controversial actually, the date of this statue. It was I think traditionally and long thought by most people to be an Etruscan statue, which I'll get to in a minute, from very early on in Rome's history. But some recent analysis has suggested it may possibly be a Renaissance or late, some kind of late statue. So as far as I know, it's as yet unresolved. Certainly stylistically it matches up more with an ancient piece of art, but people who are looking at the metals and whatnot have called that into question. So what is known is that whenever the statue was made, the two children underneath were actually added. For sure were added during the Renaissance, because they're not part of the original statue. Okay, so just to set the stage, but we'll go back to the Alban kings. So we had the line of Alban kings, and we have the last of that line, two brothers, Amulius and Numitor. So you kind of notice the pattern with the twins here. Numitor was supposed to be the king, but his throne was usurped by his brother, kind of evil brother, Amulius. And so Numitor had a daughter named Rhea Silvia, and there was a prophecy that any child of Rhea Silvia would overthrow the king and become king. So Amulius locked her up, and she became, as fate finds a way, and so she became pregnant by the god Mars. That was kind of referring back, if you think back to the reference from Livy at the beginning of Mars being the father, god of war being the father of the Roman people. So she became pregnant by the god Mars in captivity and gave birth to twins, Romulus and Remus, the two kind of heroes of our story. So Amulius, of course, didn't want the kids to come later and usurp him, so he did what you do in this situation. You don't want to get directly punished. You don't want to kill the kids directly and get punished for it. So he had them, exposed on the riverbank in hopes that they would die there. You mean, this is a classic tale. It comes up in all over the place, not just in Greek and Roman myth, but in other mythologies around the world. But conveniently, the river was flooding, and so they were placed in a basket, or a basket was sort of naturally made for them, and they floated downstream and were rescued by a she-wolf, which is where we get this image from. And the she-wolf nursed them until they were a little bit older, and then a shepherd found them, and raised them with his family. And then eventually, kind of skip over some of the history, but eventually they came to the attention of these two brothers, both the ruling king Amulius and his brother Numitor, whom they helped overthrow his brother, and he was reestablished. And so this kind of legitimized, kind of set the stage for the line of kings that would rule Rome. And so Romulus and Remus, though, were twins, right? So there's no, if you kind of follow the law as the Romans did of primogeniture, they only had one king at a time, so they couldn't have two guys ruling two brothers. And so they decided to leave it up to the gods to decide. So Romulus went to the Palatine Hill, which I showed you on the map in the first slide, and Remus went to the Aventine Hill. And they watched for a flock of birds, essentially the art of augury, bird watching for prophecy. So Romulus, we're told, saw 6 birds in a flock coming, but then Remus saw 12 birds. And so they had an argument over, well, I saw the birds first, but I saw more birds. So they had a fight, which eventually ended up in Remus being killed. So this sort of, I mean, again, if you kind of analogize to the Bible or other stories, this kind of fratricide to start a society or civilization is kind of a theme as old as time. And so so Romulus starts this new kingdom. And his it's interesting. So he's on the Palatine Hill, which that's the word that gives us the word palace in English. And if you're kind of thinking back to what I was talking about with Livy and Dionysius Halicarnassus and these later historians kind of creating, essentially molding the myth out of what were just early stories, they would have been looking at the current state of Rome under the Emperor Augustus, which is during this period, the Palatine Hill is covered with rich people's houses, and eventually would become the hill where all the emperors had their palaces, hence the English word palace. Whereas the Aventine was the neighborhood of poorer people. So basically, the plebeian section of the city versus the patrician section of the city. So in a lot of ways, this myth, this kind of fight between the two, is just a metaphorical representation of the clash between the two factions of Roman society. Basically, the very small patrician kind of elite who end up controlling the city, and then the plebs who at various times in Roman history actually exerted a lot of power, and kind of pulled back some of that influence. So it's really interesting, just the location of the two prophecies. And then the idea of the auguries is significant as well, but I'm going to save that for our next for sort of the last piece that I'll give you after T Ryan talks about the next one. So,
Yep, thanks, Jeff. So the next one is jumping back again to Lazio, also from Marco Carpinetti, as you can probably tell, with the almost exact same label. And this, however, this is a very different wine from the Tufalicio. Whereas the Tufalicio, a little bit lighter, fresher, little bit more kind of on the approachable style. Capolimole is a little bit more on the little more serious, a little more structured style. So it's a 2020, a little bit longer aging here. This is also a 60-40 blend of Montepulciano, but the 40% is made up of a grape called Nero Buono. This is also my first time ever having a Nero Buono was this particular wine. It's very exciting to always try new varieties. Nero Buono is a variety actually only a few growers still produce it in this region of Cori in Lazio. It's a grape that has thicker skins. It's something that is almost always made into a darker, dry, structured red. And it's definitely something that gives a little bit more of that a little more earthy tone, a little bit more of that kind of brambly kind of. I think I used the term forest floor, and I'm definitely getting that again. A little bit of that kind of just like under earth sort of element to it. But there's still some nice kind of supple dark fruits there as well. So whereas the Tupalicio was aged entirely in stainless steel, this is aged in large oak barrels. So like big like botti size. That's like 500-liter size. I think if I'm correct for the all the primary aging for this wine. So again, little bit more of a different take on what the region can do. Still has like a lot of kind of like verve and energy to it. Capolemole is the name of another one of the vineyards in the Carpinetti estate. And it's also on a hillside vineyard as well. But yeah, very again, very exciting always to try some of these again, indigenous varieties. I mean, Italy is full of them. Like you throw a rock and you're finding a variety that four people grow and no one's ever heard of. But it is always fun to kind of to see the diversity. And when you look up the lineages of some of these grapes, like a lot of them have Greek origins. A lot of them have origins that are unknown. So definitely just from the wine nerd side of things, it's pretty fun.
Yeah, and we actually got to try a 100% Nero Bono when we were tasting with the importer for it, which was a little bit more expensive, but a really cool, very structured wine, aged in oak as well.
Yeah, we were definitely considering having that as a special offering. I think we kind of also thought we wanted to save it for another time when we were going to do another Lazio or Rome or in the region because we really liked both of these and it's kind of like had to again like have to kill your darlings kind of thing. So we picked the two and we're very happy with the Tubalici and the Capolemole, but the Nzu, it's NZU is how it's spelled, is the 100% Nerebuono that we were looking at that we may revisit in a future club when we travel to Rome or Lazio anywhere around there.
Yeah. I mean, I've never been to Lazio personally.
hmm Yeah,
Yeah.
for one, I mean, I haven't either, and it's something that gets overlooked a lot. I think while we're here talking about Lazio, it's a region that I think gets kind of written off or doesn't get quite as much fanfare as, let's say, Tuscany, which has a lot more international recognition for sometimes I wouldn't say similar wines, but in the same ballpark. So, you can get a lot of Sangiovese, Montepulciano crossover sometimes. And same with wines from the Marche or wines from Puglia that you have more Montepulciano that you can see. So I think Lazio is, again, it's interesting because it's so close to the capital, but it's not exported at the same maybe like vigor again as like a Piemonte or a Tuscany.
Yeah, I think probably one of the reasons is that, maybe I think because it's so near to the capital, they al always had a market, so they didn't need to really advertise that much. They can kind of
Yep.
just skate on the fact of their proximity to Rome.
Yep, absolutely. No,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. Yeah, I think spot on. Yeah. All right, I think we pass it back to Jeff here, right? Finish things off. Take us home.
All right. So yeah, so this famous painting here by Jacques-Louis David of the capture of the Sabine women. So as I mentioned in the last little segment, Rome was very much built on immigration and basically just being receptive to having new members become citizens. So, I mean, obviously there are restrictions, like they didn't have women could not be citizens and enslaved people could not be citizens, but they did have a fairly, I mean, by modern standards, probably would consider if you consider slavery as an institution, they had a very progressive version of slavery in the sense that you could be freed, and then you could become within one generation a full Roman citizen. So, and freed, freed men, they had to be men, but they could themselves kind of rise up above their, just they could rise up and become sort of influential on their own, and then their any male children they had would become Roman citizens. So it was a mechanism for really quickly building the citizenship of the Roman state. Very effective. And they did the same thing when they conquered tribes. So if you sort of gave yourself over willingly to the Romans, and weren't all killed in battle, they were very receptive to welcoming you in. First usually as allies, and then as over time as full Roman citizens. So over time the citizenship the gradually became extended throughout the entire Roman Empire. It's really interesting, and again, in a lot of ways, very progressive compared to our modern, even in our modern system, where there's just a lot of you know these days, especially, there's a lot of kind of walls being put up everywhere as people are trying to move around. So it's really interesting. And even within the immediate vicinity of Rome, you had two main tribes. You had the Sabines and the Etruscans. So the Etruscans have come up a lot tonight, and they come up a lot in our discussion because they, before the Romans, were the most powerful tribe in northern Italy. And it's from them that Romans actually have a lot of the traditions like augury, the fasces, which are the bundle of rods that symbolize Roman power. They have a lot of these traditions that we know are just basically Etruscan traditions, which is really interesting. The Etruscans had a writing system way before the Romans came up with their own. Their tombs are filled with Greek pots. One of the most prolific sources of Greek art comes actually out of tombs. Most of it's looted, but tombs in Etruria. So they're very sophisticated, highly developed culture that the Romans kind of came up against. They defeated them militarily, but they did the same thing that they did with the Greeks. They just took a lot of their customs, traditions, and adapted it as their own. So of the first, there's Romulus, who we know is just more of a mythological creation, but there were six more kings, right? There were seven kings. Of those six more kings after Romulus. Of those six, three were Etruscan, three were Sabine. So basically, they were being ruled by, adopted kings from their neighbors. so the Roman state is just an amalgam essentially of local tribes who come together and eventually, build up a city state on the banks of the Tiber. Beginning with the Palatine Hills. Really, really interesting. Um, and so in these early days, they, as with many new civilizations, we're told in the kind of in the historiography that they're missing, they don't have enough women essentially to, to grow the city. And so what Romulus did was he invited the neighboring tribes, mainly the Sabines, for a feast, a banquet, to celebrate the feast of Saturnalia, the harvest festival. And at the banquet, they basically just took the women away from the guys, basically stole all the women. So this the Sabine guys weren't happy about this, so they started a war. So it's kind of a mythological explanation for the conflict of these tribes. But in that battle, in the main battle, the women actually intervened in the battle and stopped the fighting. And then a peace was reached in which most of the girls married the Roman guys. And then the Sabines were for a while allowed a co-ruler with Romulus in that first generation. And then of course the subsequent kings ended up being Sabine kings. So it's kind of a nifty way, I think, if you're a Roman, of explaining that you're more or less the kind of the aggressor in the situation, not being conquered by the foreign people, but really in historical reality, it's probably the other way around. That really it was the Sabines who kind of became the dominant tribe in Lazio in Rome. So that's kind of the way I read it. And so after this, Rome flourished, and Romulus himself actually disappeared mysteriously during a thunderstorm. We're told, sort of disappeared, but probably, according to the Romans, swept up into the heavens by Jupiter. And so we don't have any record of him after that. And the Romans actually continued to worship him as a god now, kind of like Hercules became a god and he was worshipped as a god. And so the god, he actually got a different name, which was Quirinus, which was this name of a local god. So I think it was a Sabine god. And so the divine Quirinus was just the deified Romulus, essentially. And so there's a whole holiday in February, the Quirinalia, which was celebrated in honor. Sorry, you can hear my baby crying in the background, maybe, but so the yeah the sorry, I'm just getting a little distracted. So they have the Quirinalia in February, and then another festival called the Lupercalia, which we actually did an Ancient Wine Guys event. I can't remember whether it was called Wines of Lupercalia or Wines of Valentine's Day or something like that, but it was at
Yeah, it was the same Valentine's one that we did a full event on, I think.
yeah,
Yeah,
it was.
but
I can't
we
remember what
referenced it.
the
Yeah.
title of it, but it was Lupercalia, which was a celebration of it's basically the kind of wool festival, it has a kind of a spurious connection to modern day Valentine's Day, but we were able to kind of make it work. And I think, as I was thinking about that event, I think it generated one of our best selling wines of all time with the Muclos Mavro. Thanks to Todd. I think that came out of that event in Berkeley. But anyway, the point of the story is that I don't know what the point of the story. The point of the story is there was a Lupercalia festival, which is celebrated by the Romans in connection as well with Romulus. So kind of end by saying in 2007 there was a discovery by Italian archaeologists of a chamber underneath the Palatine Hill, which you'll remember is the earliest known settlement of the city of Rome. And there's a chamber which some of them thought might be connected to a cave that the Romans called the Lupercal, which was they had a shrine there, we were told, and it was a cave that was, thought to be the place where the she-wolf suckled the two young boys. But then other archaeologists disagree, and think it's connected with a nymphaeum, which was a shrine, kind of a shrine, nymphs inhabited natural places connected with the Emperor Augustus. So, 750 years later. So I don't have enough information to weigh in on the debate, but it's definitely a conversation about these. There's a lot of interest in these very early sites that come up in Rome. It's very difficult to distinguish what might be contemporary with the early history of Rome and what was then put up by later Romans to celebrate, their mythological origin. So that's the case with a lot of the things that have been found in the Roman Forum, where it's thought, oh yeah, Romulus walked on this stone, but it's probably just a shrine, put up by later Romans, as they're becoming more confident in their, in kind of their origin story and everything else to sell it. Yeah, I mean, this is again another story as old as time. I'm kind of selling your own history. So I think both your own people and to the people that you're conquering. So I think that's a good way to kind of tie it up there. And then if anyone has any questions at the end, we can take them. And we'll move on now to the first of our special offer wines, which I mean, I know you guys were kind of trying to just decide between the two, but this one it's pretty hard not to have this one as one of our special offers, right? So
Yeah, this wine is really cool. It's the only winery, literally within the city confines, the city limits of Rome, and it's made by a prince, Alessandro Jacopo Boncompagni Ludovisi, who's actually a really nice guy. He's actually really humble. I got to meet him once at a tasting, and I didn't have to like bow or kiss a ring or anything like that. And he was just like, just call me Alessandro, and he inherited the vineyards from his uncle in the 1940s. By the way, their family still has a apartment in the Vatican, so this shows you like their kind of lineage. And you can visit their winery. I haven't had a chance to visit them yet, but next time you're in Rome, it's pretty easy. We can help set up a visit with them. And yeah, you might be wondering, oh, why is, they're growing Cabernet Sauvignon in Italy? And the reason is, just like when France was kind of the lingua franca of the elites in Europe, where, for example, when like War and Peace, Tolstoy, all the Russian aristocrats like spoke French. A lot of Italian aristocrats, learned French growing up, and they, especially in his uncle and grandfather in like the 18th, 19th century. So they kind of emulated what wines, the French wines. So they grew Bordeaux varieties. So um, Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, etc. So this is 1% cab, and it's done in stainless steel tanks. This is kind of, and then he has a higher end one, which he ages in acacia barrels. But you would think, oh, like if you do Cabernet Sauvignon, which has thick uh, skins, and then you do it in stainless, it's going to be harsh. But actually, it's not harsh at all. And one of the reasons for that is that he uses a traditional kind of like wooden press, and he presses the grapes really softly, so it doesn't extract too much of the tannins from the Cabernet Sauvignon grapes. And what I find fascinating about it is it's actually softer than a lot of cabs that you see aged in oak barrels, say from like Napa or something. And it's not as heavy either on the palate. You still get that little bit of herbaceousness to it, but it's just a nice brown, like really elegant, like just like silky. It kind of flows through the back of your, from like the front of your tongue to the back. And I think texturally, it's just yeah, for lack of a better word, like just a elegant wine and smooth.
See, would you use the word regal?
Yeah, yeah,
I also found this one again to be really compelling for as a cab from Italy. there's a lot of cab that's grown in Tuscany for like super Tuscans, and I find it to be pretty kind of clunky and also, in my opinion, not always necessary for like how structured they can get the Sangiovese there. But I definitely think there's some wonderful cabs growing there too. But yeah, this was I think a one that doesn't have the same like extraction. It's not like purple and dark and inky like you see from cabs from the New World or anything like that. But really refined. Yeah, I thought it was a really nice way to get reacquainted with the grape that we all know, that we all love, that we can definitely see a different side of it here. And it's just really yeah like a really kind of elegant is probably the best term, elegant hand with it.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, the label that's the family crest. So
It's a cool label. Yeah. Thanks, D.
yeah.
I think let's move on to the next one. So I'll take us through here for the next offering. I almost said wine, which I'm so used to saying wine, but this is our first ever olive oil that we've ever actually featured in the club. And we obviously all, I mean, hopefully, if you're a member or if you're listening to this, I hope you love olive oil. And if you don't, you should start because it's wonderful, it's good for you, and it's good to cook with, but also good on its own. So this is the 2024 Poderi San Lazzaro. They're extra virgin olive oil. This is 2024 is the harvest, and I guess I want to before I jump into this olive oil itself. I do want to make a note. If you're not familiar with freshness with olive oil and kind of about the what you should do with olive oil, number one thing to know is that it doesn't age like wine. Don't cellar it. If you've gotten a lovely gift of olive oil from somebody or a friend, someone went to Italy or Greece and Spain, and they came back with a great bottle, you should use it soon. Use it as fast as possible. Olive oil producers will always tell you they want the freshest product possible. So, that bottle you've been saving and sitting on top of your fridge, like use it. Just absolutely just kind of, go through it and then go get a new bottle. Go get a fresher bottle. Go find it, at your store that you love. Always look on the back label. It should say the harvest date and it should say what year it was harvested. Again, this is we all have our olive oils that are like from Costco that you're using for like doing whatever with whatever, like that's fine. But I'm saying if you're gonna have an olive oil, you're gonna drizzle fresh on salads or have with bread and oil and vinegar or something like that. Ideally, you want something fresh because that will actually have where like the health benefits, it hasn't all oxidized away, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my little soapbox about freshness for olive oil. It's kind of the opposite of wine where you kind of use it as fast as possible. And olive oil producers will tell you, keep it out of the sun and keep it somewhere dark and it'll be better for all the while that you have it. So we're going to taste through this olive oil. I actually have my bottle here. And if you've never done an olive oil tasting, we actually did one, kind of a guided one in Greece actually a couple months ago, but I've done a few in the past. Typically, you use a small glass. This glass actually is not the right glass because it is clear. You don't want to use a clear glass, technically. This if you're going to like a professional olive oil tasting, they will give you a dark glass. It'll be like red or black or blue or something like that because the color doesn't really matter. They will tell you that. Olive oils can range from almost like pale clear to super super dark green to really deep golden yellow. It doesn't color is not an indicator of quality for olive oils. So you don't want to be biased when you're tasting olive oils is the reason why they'll give you a colored glass. But in this case, it's kind of fun because these are just like some snifters that I happen to have. But the shape is actually the reason I selected this glass. This is basically you have a little taste here, and when you start off, obviously you can smell it like wine, whatever you want to do. You can take a deep breath in, have your mouth open a little bit. It's gonna be a little different from tasting wine in that it's gonna have kind of different like propensities to kind of jump out of the glass in different ways. And another thing you'll also notice is that you want to warm it up in your hand. This is also what you do when you're tasting is you can have a little give a little swirl, that sort of thing. But they will definitely recommend that you warm it up in your hand and that you also can kind of you want to aerate it as well. So you can aerate it in the glass, but also I'm about to take a sip here. You aerate it on the palate as well. So when you take a sip, you're going to kind of again, this is kind of the formal sort of technique. You take a little sip, and then when you have a bit in your mouth, you go, and you can kind of get a little bit of that air that travels through there, and then obviously you can taste and swallow the olive oil. But So this is a really lovely olive oil. That's kind of the end of the technique there. It's a blend of three varieties: Lecchino, Carbonella, and Sargano. And this is from the Marche, so a little bit north, kind of east of Rome. And again, it's one of our favorites. We often sell it to ourselves and use it, but we also give it as gifts for friends and things like that. And so we're very excited to have had it as our first olive oil offering from the Ancient Wine Guys for the club. So I can give a little bit of tasting notes, but I'm not an olive oil expert in the same way that I'm a wine expert. But I'm always happy to try olive oils. So you're looking for like the texture, obviously. Also, some are very light. Some are going to be much richer and fuller. This one, for me, like really nicely balanced, like kind of down the middle. You do get some kind of green grassy notes. You get some fruit notes to it. But there's also just a nice kind of like sort of buttery finish to it as well. I think it's a really nicely balanced one. It's not a super like fruit bomb. It definitely lends a little bit more towards like the sweeter, richer sort of buttery side of things. But very versatile, and again, something that you could kind of use for cooking, or you could also just guzzle it down like I do with bread.
Yeah,
So
another
I think
thing
that,
with olive oil that might be worth mentioning, Ryan, is that that really like harsh kind of feeling like feeling like tingling that you want to cough. That's actually a very positive quality of olive oil. So it's an indicator of high quality olive oil, because it gives you that like that, I guess it's the phenolics or whatever that
yep,
is. It just
that kind
makes
of it's a burn. It's like almost
almost
like, oh,
like
it's
a
kind of
burn.
peppery burn.
Yeah, some of
Hmm.
those I mean, some of those olive oils we tried at the tasting in Greece, it was just, I mean, very very strong. um
I-
People were coughing, and that's, I mean, in just about any other setting you'd be like, there's something wrong with it. Everybody at the table is coughing, but in the context of an olive oil tasting, it's actually a very positive quality. And I assume you develop, if you're doing it professionally, you develop a sort of ability not to have that reflex. But it is, if you're feeling that when you're drinking an olive oil or tasting olive oil, you're onto a very strong marker of high quality olive oil. So
Yep,
yeah.
yep. Good point there, Jeff.
And this olive oil would be, I'm thinking, we're getting to fall weather. So I'm like, this is something, you know, obviously great for like salads or, dipping bread in, but also like just finishing off like, a little drizzle over your butternut squash soup, during the winter months.
Yep.
Um, and would be great. And, I didn't know a lot about olive oil. Ryan taught me a lot about it. Like, and I have to say that some of my regrets have been, buying like a nice bottle of olive oil like this when I was in Greece or something, and then I'm just like, oh well, it's like you're like, I'm gonna save it for the special occasion, and then a year later, I still have like three-quarters of a bottle,
And it's not that it's
and
gone
and then
bad.
and it
It's
loses some of its flavor, some of its
yeah.
that peppery quality, that like and like nice like green herby quality, and then it kind of tastes just like an olive oil you would use for cooking.
Yeah, it hasn't gone bad. It's just, I
Yeah,
mean, olive oils do go rancid. I mean, like that's important to know. And but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily gone like bad and spoiled, like it's ever gonna like hurt you or make you sick or anything like that. It's just like, again, you're kind of losing that, you know, unique freshness that you are paying for, in a nice olive oil. So that's kind of the reason why the olive oil producers always just like, no, like use it up and then come back and get more, come back and get a fresh one. So yeah.
yeah, another thing to mention, just that again, for that might be kind of counterintuitive if you're looking at olive oil labels, and it's not always marked, but that the if it's called early harvest, that's actually another positive quality of the olive oils, the early harvest versus um I don't think they'll call it late harvest, but you maybe think about wine, you're like, oh, I don't want something that's picked so it's, super green and not ripe, but actually with olive oil, that was one of the things we found, when we were tasting them over in Greece, was that those premium ones always made sure to advertise that they were early harvest as well. Kind of clarify that.
yeah.
So interesting as
And then
well.
yeah, and one of the reasons is that we're talking about that freshness that you get, and also early harvest. as you can imagine, like the olives are going to be a little bit harder, so then you get less oil out of like,
Mm.
per olive as a result. So
Mhm.
it's, lower yield. So that's why a lot of people,
Yeah.
if you want to get more bulk olive oil, get more oil out of your olives, then you let them ripen more.
Yeah. So I think we're trying to tell you you should be spending more money on olive oil. Yeah, I think you probably are. And I think I might probably have I've had so much of this particular olive oil, it probably shows up on blood tests. Right, because it's one of the ones that we've worked with yeah, with one of our importers that we really like, and it's been so reliable that I've ordered a lot of this over the years. So
Yeah, yeah. I know December's coming around when Jeff is like, "Hey, can you get like on December shipping day? Can you go to Vinity and like get some
some of this,
Poderi San Lazaro a case of Poderi San Lazaro olive oil for me?" So
well, it's
yeah,
actually we don't have that many of our wine importers that also work with, small production olive oil producers. Like the Mercury is the other one that we've done quite a bit of work with. But
Yeah.
we're working on that, kind of expanding our repertoire of these. So if you like this sort of thing and you want to get more of it from us, we're working on that, kind of adding that to our portfolio a little bit, here and there. So yeah, because it's fun. It's fun to work. It's fun and it's delicious and it's like you said, Ryan, it's extremely helpful and stuff. So
Yep. Yep. Well, I think that probably just about wraps it up on from our side. So, yeah, thank you everybody for attending and for listening as always, and for being a club member and for supporting us. If you want to get any additional quantities of any of these wines or the olive oil, you just always send us an email, and we can take care of any of your needs there. Shipping's free to California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and $5 to everywhere else. $5 a bottle, I should say. Um, and yeah, if anyone has any questions, wants to chime in, happy to, as always, to have a Q&A. Otherwise, you can always fire off a question to us either via social media, Instagram, Facebook, et cetera, or via email as well. Or you can send us a text message or a phone call too, if you have our number. It's on our website. But yeah,
and
so
our next
thanks
club
again.
is in December, and
That's right.
we'll try to get it to you obviously before Christmas. But if you happen to be out of town, just let us know.
yeah,
Yep.
We'll
and you heard it here. You
probably
heard
have
it
some
here first,
special
but the
offers.
the topic's going to be Crete again. So I'm very excited about that. We already have a couple wines lined up for that. So yeah, Dana was out there as well doing some sourcing for us this summer. So in Crete. So really excited about that.
And if you need anything before Thanksgiving, let us know. We will be making a trip to the warehouse for shipping, though not an official club shipping day. But if you do end up needing anything, do let us know.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. It's always such a delight to see you all remotely, and we definitely look forward to this, to this hour and a half as much as we do to putting together the wine club. So hope you all stay well, and we'll see you, if not before, we'll see you in December.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.